The generator hummed, a low, steady thrum against the backdrop of the hurricane's fury. It was the only sound in the house not made by the storm, and it was a sound I knew my wife Sarah hated. Not just because it was loud, but because it was proof. Proof that I was right. Proof that all her mocking, all her eye rolls, all her whispers to her friends about my crazy prepper husband were a cruel, devastating lie. The irony, bitter and sharp as battery acid, was that without that generator, without all the things she had laughed at, we might not have made it through the night. And what a night it was turning into. Just 2 days ago, the air between us had been thick with accusations. "Are you serious, Mark? Another pallet of water? We have a perfectly good filtration system," she'd shrieked, pointing at the new emergency filters I'd just brought in. Her face was red, her arms crossed, and her eyes, usually warm and comforting, were ice cold. It's like you want something bad to happen, just so you can say, "I told you so." That last part, that accusation, had cut me deeper than any of her usual jabs. I wasn't some doomsday cultist hoping for the end of the world. I was just trying to be ready, trying to protect us, protect her. "It's about being prepared, Sarah," I'd yelled back, my voice cracking with frustration. "Not about wanting disaster. What if the power goes out for weeks? What if the water main breaks? What then?" She had just scoffed, a dismissive sound that was worse than any insult. "Then we call someone Mark. That's what normal people do. You are obsessed. It's not help." She'd turned on her heel and walked away, slamming the bedroom door behind her, leaving me alone in the living room, surrounded by my neatly stacked boxes of emergency food and first aid kits. A grim satisfaction had settled in my gut, quickly followed by a heavy dread when the news alert popped up on my phone a few minutes later. Hurricane Evangeline, now a Category 4, direct path, heading straight for our coast. Mandatory evacuations advised for coastal areas, voluntary for inland. We were just inland enough to be in the voluntary zone. I'd knocked on the bedroom door, tentative. "Sarah, did you see the news? Hurricane's coming?" Silence. Then a muffled voice. "So what? It'll blow over. It always does." Her voice was laced with a tone that implied I was exaggerating, seeking validation for my obsession. It was infuriating. I wanted to shake her, to make her understand the gravity of it. But what was the point? She wouldn't listen. She never listened when it came to this. The next day had been a blur of frantic last-minute preparation. I filled every bathtub with water, boarded up windows on the ground floor, moved anything loose into the garage. Sarah stayed mostly in the bedroom, emerging only to grab snacks or complain about the noise of my drill. She still hadn't really acknowledged the hurricane's threat. "Are you going to board up all the windows?" she'd asked, standing in the kitchen doorway, a smoothie in her hand. "It's going to make the house so dark." Tone was light, almost playful, as if I was just doing some elaborate home improvement project, not bracing for a life-threatening storm. "Yes, Sarah," I'd said, my voice flat. "It's called hurricane preparedness." She just shrugged, took a sip of her smoothie, and disappeared again. Now, as the storm raged outside, those boards felt like a thin shield against an angry god. The wind howled, a primal scream that vibrated through the very foundations of the house. Rain lashed against the windows, not like water, but like handfuls of gravel being thrown. I could hear things hitting the house, branches, debris. The power had gone out hours ago, a sudden, complete blackness that swallowed the familiar glow of our home. Sarah had let out a small gasp, then a frustrated sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she'd muttered. I guess it was bound to happen. She still sounded annoyed, not scared. That's when I'd slipped out to the garage, started the generator, and hooked up the essential circuits. The first thing I turned on was the refrigerator. Then a few lights in the living room and kitchen, just enough to cut through the oppressive darkness. Sarah had walked in, blinking at the sudden light, her face a mixture of surprise and a subtle. Just looked at me, her eyes unreadable, and went to check on the food in the fridge. She'd always been good at avoiding the uncomfortable truth. But the truth was humming right outside, a mechanical heartbeat in a world gone silent. And that silence, that terrible echoing silence where the comforts of modern life used to be, was about to teach us all a lesson. I just hoped it wouldn't be too brutal. The world outside was a symphony of destruction, but inside our house, a new kind of silence had settled. The generator's steady thrum was a comforting presence, but it also highlighted the eerie quiet of everything else. No hum of the refrigerator, just its internal fan. No whir of the air conditioner, just the fan I had plugged into an outlet, pushing lukewarm air around the stuffy living room. Power had been out for 3 hours now, and the house was growing steadily warmer. Sarah sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, which was connected to a charging block I topped off earlier. She looked bored, then frustrated when her signal kept dropping. "Is there any news?" she asked, not looking up. Her voice was flat. "The radio says it's still Category 4. I'm making landfall soon," I replied, gesturing to the battery-powered weather radio on the coffee table. It was tuned to the emergency broadcast, spitting out static-laced updates. "They're saying widespread power outages are expected for days, maybe weeks, and storm surges higher than predicted." She finally looked up, her brow furrowed. "Weeks? Don't be ridiculous, Mark. They'll have it back on by tomorrow latest." There was that dismissal again. It was like a reflex for her, an automatic denial of anything that upset her comfortable worldview. I just sighed, picking up a book. What was the point of arguing? The storm would prove me right soon enough. And it did. The wind picked up. A high-pitched shriek that made the windows vibrate even behind their wooden shields. Then came a series of crashes, loud and jarring. It sounded like something big was breaking apart. Sarah gasped, dropping her phone. "What was that?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "Sounds like a tree," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Or a fence. Stay away from the windows." She didn't need telling twice. She moved closer to me on the couch, a nervous energy radiating from her. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the hurricane unleash its fury. It was terrifying, even from the relative safety of our home. The house shuddered with each powerful gust, groaning as if in pain. The rain sounded like 1,000 tiny hammers hitting the roof. It was nothing like the mild tropical storms we usually got. This was different. This was truly destructive. After what felt like an eternity, the wind seemed to lessen slightly. The eye of the hurricane was passing over us. There was a lull, a deceptive calm, but the rain still poured down. Sarah used the momentary quiet to go to the kitchen. I heard her fumbling around. "Mark," she called out, her voice tight. "The refrigerator isn't making ice." "No," I said, walking in. "I only hooked up the main compartments for food preservation, not the ice maker. We need to conserve power." She stared at the empty ice dispenser with a look of pure bewilderment, as if I had personally removed the ice out of spite. "But it's so hot in here. I wanted some ice for my water." "We're lucky to have a fridge at all, Sarah," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Most people don't. We have limited fuel for the generator." She frowned, turning away. "Right, of course. Always limitations with you." She went back to the living room, her shoulders slumped. I knew she was still thinking about her iced water. It was such a small thing, but it was a symptom of her entire mindset. A belief that modern conveniences were a given, an entitlement, not a fragile system that could be easily disrupted. Outside, the first cries started. Faint at first, carried on the wind, then growing louder. "Help!" someone screamed. "Is anyone there?" "My roof." Then another voice panicked. "My power lines are down. A tree fell on my car." Sarah stiffened, looking towards the front door. "Are those our neighbors?" I nodded grimly. "Sounds like it." The first knock came shortly after, timid at first, then more insistent. It was our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly woman who lived alone. I opened the door a crack, letting in a gust of humid air and the smell of wet earth and shattered wood. Her face was pale, streaked with rain and tears. "Mark, dear, is your power on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Mine's completely out, and my phone's dead. I can't call my daughter." I hesitated. This was it, the real test. "We have a generator, Mrs. Henderson. Come in, get out of the rain." Sarah appeared behind me, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Henderson stepped inside, her eyes falling on the softly glowing lamps. A look of immense relief washed over her face, quickly followed by a glimmer of something else. Envy? Or just the dawning realization of her own vulnerability? She saw the light, she heard the generator. She knew what that meant. And I knew what she was about to ask. The unspoken plea hung in the air, heavy and silent before she even opened her mouth again. Mrs. Henderson, a woman who usually bustled with cheerful energy, looked utterly defeated. She wiped rain from her face with a trembling hand. "Oh, Mark, thank goodness. I'm so sorry to bother you, but my phone, it's completely dead. I need to let my daughter know I am all right. Can I just charge it for a few minutes?" Her eyes darted towards the outlets, then to Sarah, who was still standing by the couch, watching us with a strange mixture of pity for Mrs. Henderson and something like defensiveness. I nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. Go ahead. The outlet by the kitchen counter is working." As she stumbled towards the kitchen, fumbling in her purse for her phone charger, Sarah finally spoke. "Mark, what exactly did you hook up to the generator?" Her voice was quiet, almost too quiet. "Just the essentials," I said, keeping my voice low. "The refrigerator, a few lights, and 1 or 2 outlets for charging. And the fan, obviously it's getting hot." She walked over to me, her voice dropping even lower. "So you do have power?" "Why didn't you say something?" There was an edge to her tone, an accusation. "You didn't ask, Sarah," I said, meeting her gaze. "And honestly, after everything you said about my prepping, I wasn't exactly keen on rubbing it in your face." Her jaw tightened. "Rubbing it in? Mark, people are without power. People are scared, and you just kept this to yourself." "I didn't keep it to myself," I retorted, my voice rising slightly. "I was dealing with the storm. I started it up for us. For our food, for our safety." The unspoken thought hung in the air. For our safety, the safety you scoffed at. Mrs. Henderson's phone let out a little beep as it started charging, and she let out a relieved sigh. "Oh, thank the heavens," she murmured. Sarah glanced at her, then back at me, her expression hardening. "So now what?" she asked, her voice low and sharp. "Are we going to be the only house on the block with power? What are people going to think?" "I don't know, Sarah," I said, running a hand through my hair. "Right now, I am thinking about surviving this storm and conserving fuel for the generator. We have a finite supply." She just shook her head, a frustrated, disbelieving look on her face. Always with the conservation, always with the scarcity. Can't we just be a little comfortable? We have the generator, don't we? Yes, we have the generator, I said, my voice tight. Because I spent money and time on it, time you mocked me for. And now that generator is keeping our food from spoiling and giving us a little bit of light and air. But it's not an endless supply of power. It needs gasoline, and who knows when we'll be able to get more. She turned away from me then, a defeated slump to her shoulders. She walked over to the armchair, picked up her phone, and started scrolling again, though I knew she had no signal. It was her way of shutting me out, of refusing to engage with a reality she didn't like. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak. The cold shoulder, it was worse than an argument sometimes. It was a complete dismissal, a silent judgment that implied I was being unreasonable, even cruel, despite all my efforts. Mrs. Henderson, her phone now charging, timidly asked, "Mark, do you have any extra batteries for a flashlight? Mine are all dead, and it's so dark at my place." I went to my supply bin and pulled out a pack of D-cell batteries. "Here you go, Mrs. Henderson. Take these. Be careful out there." "Oh, you are a lifesaver, Mark." "A real lifesaver," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. She glanced at Sarah, who still hadn't looked up from her phone. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my arm. "Thank you, truly." Then she slipped out, back into the dim post-eye light of the storm, leaving us alone again. The air in the house seemed to thicken. Sarah hadn't said another word, but her silence was deafening. I felt a surge of bitterness, all the times she had made fun of me. All the arguments about money spent on supplies, the eye rolls about my bug-out bag, or my water purification tablets. Now, here we were, and every single one of those ridiculed items was a lifeline. I had the generator, I had the water, I had the food, and she had nothing but her empty phone and her resentment. The satisfaction I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't a victory, this was just bleak. And I knew with a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. The real challenges and the real tests of our relationship were yet to come. The generator hummed, a constant reminder of the divide between us. The eye of the hurricane passed, and the back half of the storm hit with renewed ferocity. The wind howled again, shaking the house, and the rain hammered down relentless. But then slowly over the next few hours, the intensity began to wane. By late evening it had downgraded to a tropical storm, then just a depression. The worst was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. The first rays of dawn the next morning revealed a landscape utterly transformed. Trees were toppled like giant matchsticks, power lines snaked across roads, and roofs were peeled back like tin cans. Our street was a disaster zone. Debris was everywhere, shingles, broken fences, leaves, and what looked like parts of people's outdoor furniture. It was eerily quiet, save for the distant wail of sirens and the drip of water from battered eaves. My generator, bless its mechanical heart, was still chugging along. I had fueled it up again during the lull in the eye, carefully measuring the gasoline from the 5-gallon cans I kept in a shed. We had enough for about a week if we were careful. Beyond that, it was a gamble. Sarah was quiet that morning. She watched through a gap in the board up as I surveyed the damage in our yard. Her usual morning routine, coffee and a news app, was impossible. She settled for a cup of instant coffee I made on my propane stove and a glance through the window. The sheer scale of the devastation seemed to finally be sinking in for her. Her face was pale, and her eyes held a look of genuine shock. Then came the knocks. Not timid like Mrs. Henderson's, but louder, more desperate. The first was our direct neighbor across the street, Jim, and his wife Carol. They had a newborn barely 3 months old. Jim's face was grimy, his hair plastered to his forehead. "Mark, thank God. You guys have power?" he practically yelled, his voice hoarse. I nodded. "Just the generator, Jim. Come in." They stumbled inside, looking as if they'd been through a war. Carol was holding the baby, who was whimpering softly. "Mark, we need help," Jim said, his eyes wild with a desperation I'd never seen in him. "Our fridge is down, and we're running out of formula for Lily. It needs to be refrigerated. Do you have any way to keep it cold?" My heart sank. This was exactly what I prepared for and dreaded. "Yes, we have a fridge running," I said, gesturing towards the kitchen. "You can put it in there." Carol's eyes welled up with tears of relief. "Oh, thank you, Mark, thank you. We don't know what we would have done." While they put the small cooler of formula into our fridge, another knock came. This time, it was the Millers from down the street. The daughter, Mia, was diabetic and needed her insulin kept cold. And their phones were dead, so they couldn't contact her doctor. "Mark, we saw your lights," Mr. Miller exclaimed, breathless. "We know it's a big ask, but Mia's insulin, it needs to be refrigerated, and we can't get a signal." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. More people, more demands on the generator, more fuel consumption. I could feel Sarah's eyes on me watching. She still hadn't said anything, but her silence was almost louder than the requests piling up. I let them in too, and they carefully placed Mia's insulin box in a small corner of our already full fridge. Then they asked if they could charge their phones. I pointed them to the outlet. You'd spread fast, as it always does in a crisis. Soon there was a steady stream of people at our door. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose oxygen concentrator needed power. The Smiths, whose elderly mother had a crucial medication that required refrigeration. Teenagers begging to charge their phones just to let their worried parents know they were okay. Everyone had a reason, a need, and every need chipped away at my precious fuel supply. I started setting rules, one device at a time. Only essential items in the fridge. Please keep it quick. It felt clinical, cold even, but I had to. I had to prioritize our family. Sarah stood by the window watching the parade of desperate faces. She looked conflicted. Her face was etched with sympathy for our neighbors. But I could also see the slow dawning of understanding about the precariousness of our own situation. She saw how many people needed power, how many crucial things relied on that one humming machine in our garage. She saw the fear in their eyes and the relief when they saw our lights. She saw what it meant to be truly prepared, but she didn't offer to help. She didn't offer a kind word to the neighbors. She didn't even look at me. She just watched, her silence a heavy weight between us. I was the one bearing the burden of these requests. The one having to make the hard decisions about who got power and who didn't. And she was letting me do it alone, even as the scale of the crisis unfolded before her eyes. Cold shoulder was still there, but now it felt less like a personal slight, and more like a desperate avoidance of the crushing reality that was descending on our community and on our marriage. Days bled into each other, a hazy, humid stretch of time marked only by the rising and setting of the sun and the relentless hum of the generator. It had been 5 days since Evangeline ripped through, and the situation in our neighborhood was getting grimmer. News from the outside world was scarce. The battery radio was our only link, reporting widespread devastation, impassable roads, and promises of help that felt a million miles away. No power, no running water for most. Food spoiling. People were scared, desperate. Our house, thanks to the generator, was an island of relative normalcy in a sea of chaos. We had lights, a working fridge, and a fan, which made the oppressive heat slightly more bearable. We had food from my prepper pantry, freeze-dried meals, canned goods, stored water, but the fuel was dwindling. I had to become a strict rationing officer, for myself and for the stream of neighbors who still came knocking. I am so sorry, Mrs. Henderson, but the phone charging is only for essential calls now, I told her, my voice tight with regret. She needed to charge it to play a game to pass the time, not an emergency. Her face fell. But Mark, dear, I am so bored. My heart ached for her, but I shook my head. Every minute the generator runs uses fuel, Mrs. Henderson. We don't know when more will arrive. Some neighbors understood. Others became resentful. I overheard whispers as I was outside checking the generator. He's got power, but won't help anyone else. Selfish prepper. The word stung. I was helping. I was just trying to manage limited resources. But to a desperate person, limited often sounded like unwilling. Inside, Sarah's silence was a constant companion. She helped me hand out bottled water from my stash, and she offered some of our extra instant coffee to neighbors. But she never spoke about the generator, or about the fact that all of our relative comfort came from the very preparations she had scoffed at. She ate the freeze-dried meals, grimacing slightly but never complaining. She watched me meticulously measure out the gasoline for the generator, each morning, her expression unreadable. One evening, as I was calculating the remaining fuel, Sarah came into the garage. It was cooler out there. The air smelled of gasoline and hot metal. "Are we really going to run out?" she asked, her voice quiet. It was the first time she directly acknowledged the fuel issue. "This rate probably in 2 or 3 days. If help doesn't get here," I said, not looking up from my calculation. "I've already cut back significantly. No more charging for non-essentials. Fridge access limited to 1 time slot per Dalton Vi for neighbors." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, what about a hot shower?" "I just want a hot shower, Mark. My hair feels so greasy." My head snapped up. "Sarah, are you serious? We don't have a water heater hooked up. And even if we did, do you know how much fuel that would burn? We're lucky to have flushing toilets and cold water from the tubs." Her face hardened. "You are always saying no, always about what we can't have. It's like you enjoy denying things." That hit a raw nerve. Enjoy denying things? "Sarah, I am trying to keep us alive, to keep our food from spoiling. I am trying to manage this crisis alone while you stand by and judge me," I snapped, my voice rising. All the pent-up frustration and hurt from her mockery, from her cold shoulder, came bubbling to the surface. She recoiled, her eyes wide with surprise. "I'm not judging you, Mark. I am hot. I am tired. I am scared. And it feels like we have all this power, and you are just hoarding it. Hoarding it. Sarah, look around you. Look at our neighbors. Do you think any of them have a generator? Do you think they have food that isn't spoiling? Do you think they have clean water? I have to ration because I took the time and spent the money, and listened to all your snide comments to prepare for this." I was practically yelling now, the words tumbling out in a torrent of bitterness. She stared at me, her face pale. Then her eyes narrowed. "So this is it, isn't it? This is your big I told you so moment. You are finally getting to feel superior." That was the breaking point. The accusation, delivered with such venom, felt like a physical blow. All the anger drained out of me, replaced by a deep, hollow ache. "You think that's what this is about, Sarah?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "You think I wanted this to happen? You think I enjoy seeing our community in ruins, seeing people beg for basic necessities? You think I enjoy having to tell a desperate mother I can't charge her phone because I need to save fuel for our food? You think I enjoy feeling this weight? This responsibility alone? Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and stinging. I just wanted us to be safe, Sarah. That's all. And you laughed at me. You made me feel crazy. And now, you are still trying to make me out to be the bad guy, even when everything I did is keeping us going. She looked away, her shoulders slumping. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken words, of years of quiet disagreement and her dismissiveness. The generator hummed on, oblivious to the emotional devastation it was witnessing. The heat of the garage felt stifling, and the silence that followed my outburst was heavier than any storm. I knew then, with a terrible certainty, that the hurricane had not only laid waste to our town, but it had also, perhaps irrevocably, damaged the very foundation of our home. The raw, quiet aftermath of our argument hung in the air, thick and oppressive. Sarah had walked out of the garage without another word, leaving me alone with the humming generator and the crushing weight of my own emotion. I spent the rest of that evening in a daze, going through the motions of checking supplies, listening to the static-laced radio. Sarah stayed in the bedroom, the door closed. We ate our freeze-dried chicken and rice in silence, the only sound the clinking of our sporks and the persistent thrum from outside. The distance between us felt like an ocean. The next morning brought a fresh wave of despair. The sun was blazing, turning the ruined landscape into a humid oven. The radio reported no change, roads still largely impassable, no major relief efforts yet, and the estimated power restoration was now weeks, possibly months. My fuel estimates became even more critical. 2 days left, maybe 3 if I really pushed it. Then came the urgent, frantic knocking. Not the tentative request for phone charges, but a desperate pound. It was Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter, Maria, her face a mask of terror. "Mark, please, you have to help," she cried, her voice cracking. "It's Mama, her oxygen machine. It's battery-powered, but the battery is almost dead. She can't breathe without it. She's already struggling." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a phone. This wasn't a fridge. This was a life. Mrs. Rodriguez was elderly, frail, and suffered from severe emphysema. Her oxygen machine was her lifeline. "How long does it need to charge?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Hours, Mark. It takes hours for a full charge, and she needs to be on it while it's charging," Maria pleaded, tears streaming down her face. I looked towards the kitchen where Sarah stood frozen, listening. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with alarm. She heard it all. She heard the desperation, the plea for life. "Maria, if I run the oxygen machine for hours, it'll drain the generator's fuel at a much faster rate," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "We only have maybe 2 days left. If I run it constantly for Mama, we could be out of power by tomorrow." Maria just looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Mark, please, she's going to die." "Just for Mama." Sarah walked slowly towards me, her eyes fixed on Maria's distraught face. I could see the conflict warring within her. Sympathy, yes, but also fear. Fear for our own dwindling resources. Fear of facing the stark reality of the choices I had to make. "Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "we have to help her." I turned to her, a bitter smile twisting my lips. "And what about our food, Sarah? What about the refrigerator? What about our light and fan? What about the other neighbors who need the fridge for medicine?" "You are telling me to burn our last reserves for one person, when that means we'll have nothing left for ourselves or anyone else who might need it for a different emergency tomorrow." She flinched at my tone. "But it's a life, Mark. A life. How can you even hesitate?" "Because I have to think about all the lives, Sarah. I have to think about our lives. I have to manage these supplies until help arrives, which could be days, weeks. What if someone else needs power for surgery? What if we get sick? The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. This is the cost of being unprepared, Sarah. This is the choice I have to make, because you never took any of this seriously. Because you laughed at me when I tried to ensure we had more than enough. Her face crumpled. All the anger, the defensiveness drained away, replaced by a terrible vulnerability. "Mark," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. I was wrong. I was so wrong." She looked at Maria, then back at me, her eyes pleading. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. For everything. For mocking you. For not listening. For being so stupid and selfish." Then she turned to Maria. "Maria, bring your mother's machine here. We'll make it work." She looked at me, her eyes red but resolute. "We have to, Mark, please. We have to." The full force of her apology, so long delayed, so painfully delivered, hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the "I told you so" I had ever wanted. It was a heartbroken confession, born of desperation and the grim reality of a life or death situation. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath us. It was what I had craved for so long, but it came at the most terrible, impossible cost. The air in the house was thick with the agony of that confession, the crushing weight of the choice that now lay before me. The silence after Sarah's tearful apology was more devastating than any storm. Her words hung in the humid air. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was so sorry. So wrong. "I am so sorry." They were the words I had longed to hear, yet hearing them now, under such dire circumstances, brought no satisfaction. Only a profound, aching sorrow. It wasn't a victory. It was a surrender born of terror, a testament to how utterly unprepared she had been for the brutal realities of a world without comforts. I looked at Maria, her face etched with a desperate hope. I looked at Sarah, her eyes pleading, wet with tears, finally understanding the true stakes. And I looked into the depths of my own heart, where the urge to protect my family clashed violently with the moral imperative to save a life. "Bring her," I said, my voice barely a whisper, my throat tight. "Bring Mrs. Rodriguez here." Maria let out a sob of relief and sprinted back to her house. Sarah, still looking vulnerable and heartbroken, stepped towards me. "Mark, thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for doing this." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was already racing, calculating. If the oxygen machine drew, say, 500 watts and ran for 12 hours a day, that was 6 kilowatt-hours. With our remaining fuel, that would mean we'd be out of gas in less than 48 hours. Our refrigerator, our lights, our fans, all of it would go dark. And then what? We'd be just like everyone else, dependent on help that might not come for weeks. The thought was terrifying. Maria returned with her mother, half carrying the frail woman who was gasping for breath. The oxygen concentrator, a portable unit, was already beeping its low battery warning. We quickly found an outlet in the living room and plugged it in. The machine whirred to life, a steady, life-giving sound that instantly made Mrs. Rodriguez's breathing ease. She slumped in the chair, eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. "Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sarah," she wheezed, her voice weak but filled with gratitude. Sarah went to her, knelt by her side and gently squeezed her hand. For the first time in days, I saw a genuine warmth in Sarah's eyes, a selfless compassion that had been buried under layers of discomfort and denial. She looked at me, and this time there was no resentment, no blame, just a silent understanding of the difficult choice I had made. Choice to put a neighbor's life above our own dwindling comfort. The consequence was immediate. That night, I rationed the generator use even more severely. The fridge only ran for 2 hours. The lights were only on for an hour after sunset. The fan was a luxury we couldn't afford. The house grew hot and stuffy, the air thick and still. We ate cold canned beans for dinner, and Mrs. Rodriguez lay on our couch, her oxygen machine humming softly. Sarah didn't complain. She sat beside Mrs. Rodriguez, fanning her with a magazine, quietly talking to Maria. She didn't ask about the fuel, didn't question my decision. It was as if her apology and the subsequent act of helping had transformed her. She was no longer the dismissive wife. She was a woman facing a harsh reality, finally willing to do whatever it took. The next morning, the generator sputtered. The sound changed, became ragged. My heart leaped into my throat. I ran to the garage. The fuel tank was almost empty, critically low. I poured in the last of my gas. It gave us maybe another 12 hours. I came back inside, my face grim. Sarah looked at me, her eyes searching. I simply shook my head. "That's it," I said, my voice flat. "We're out of gas after today. No more. We've given all we can." The color drained from her face, but she didn't argue. She looked at Mrs. Rodriguez, who was still breathing steadily, though weakly, thanks to the machine. Then she looked at me, and for the first time I saw something new in her eyes. Not just understanding, but a shared burden. A silent, shared fear of what came next. We spent the day in a tense vigil. Mrs. Rodriguez continued to receive oxygen. The fridge was off, the food inside slowly warming. The air in the house grew thick with heat and anxiety. As the sun began to set, the generator made its final struggling cough, then died. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. No hum, no lights, just the soft, desperate gasp of Mrs. Rodriguez's portable oxygen unit. As its internal battery took over, a sound that quickly turned into a high-pitched alarm. Maria cried out, rushing to her mother. Sarah stared at me, her eyes wide with shock and fear. The choice was made. The consequence was here. We had saved a life, but at what cost? We were now completely, utterly in the dark, just like everyone else. And the bitter truth was, the storm was over, but our real struggle had just begun. The silence that fell when the generator died was profound, absolute. It wasn't the roaring, terrifying silence of the hurricane, but a heavy, suffocating quiet. Maria was beside herself, weeping, frantically trying to find another power source that didn't exist. Sarah, her face stark in the dim light of dusk, simply watched, her earlier resolve replaced by stark terror. "It's okay, Maria," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "It ran for as long as it could. We gave it everything, but it wasn't okay." Mrs. Rodriguez's breathing grew labored again, her gasps more desperate. Maria was sobbing. Sarah sat down heavily on the floor, her face buried in her hands. The reality of our situation, stripped bare of even the generator's comfort, was overwhelming. We sat in that suffocating darkness for what felt like an eternity. The hours stretched, each one marked by the growing dread. We had no water, save for the few bottled gallons I had stored, and the dwindling supply in the bathtubs. No way to cook, no way to cool down, and most terrifyingly, no power for critical medical needs. Then, just as the first sliver of dawn began to paint the sky, a distant rumble reached us. Faint at first, then growing louder, the sound of heavy machinery. It was a different kind of hum than my generators, deeper, more powerful. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, lifting her head. Her face was pale, tear-streaked. I scrambled to the window, peering through a crack in the boards. Down the street, in the growing light, I saw them. Convoy of utility trucks, followed by what looked like a National Guard Humvee. And then, the unmistakable sight of a FEMA truck. "Sarah," I gasped, my voice cracking with relief. "Help is here." "FEMA? National Guard. It's them." Maria let out a cry of joy. Mrs. Rodriguez, though weak, stirred and looked towards the window. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Emergency responders descended on our street, assessing damage, setting up water and food distribution points, and, most importantly, bringing power. They had large portable generators that hummed to life, powering entire sections of the neighborhood. The moment they connected a line to Mrs. Rodriguez's house, her oxygen machine hummed back to full life. Maria hugged me, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Sarah and I stood side by side, watching our street slowly come back to life. Neighbors emerged from their dark, sweltering houses, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and immense relief. The sound of their cries of joy, the cheers as lights flickered on in homes, was a balm to my soul. Later that day, as the FEMA workers set up a temporary charging station, Sarah walked over to me. Her eyes were still red, but they held a new depth, a different kind of understanding. "Mark," she said, her voice soft. I don't know what to say. If you hadn't done all of that, if you hadn't prepared, we wouldn't have made it through the worst of it." "And Mrs. Rodriguez," she trailed off, shaking her head. "I am so sorry for everything I said, for making you feel like you were crazy, for not trusting you." She reached out and took my hand, her touch hesitant. "I saw it, Mark. I saw what happens when you are not ready. I saw how desperate people become. And I saw what you did, giving up our last bit of power for Mrs. Rodriguez. You were right all along. And you are a good man." Her words, this time, didn't feel like a bitter victory. They felt like a tentative step towards healing. The raw wound of her mockery still throbbed, but her apology, delivered in the sobering light of day and shared hardship, felt genuine. It felt like a true turning point. Over the next few weeks, as recovery efforts slowly gained momentum and our neighborhood began the long, arduous process of rebuilding, Sarah changed. She didn't just acknowledge my prepping, she started to participate. She helped me inventory our remaining supplies, even suggesting things we might need for the next time. She started talking about emergency plans, about what we learned, about what we could do better. She even suggested buying more fuel when it became available. It wasn't a sudden transformation into a gung-ho prepper, but it was a quiet, profound shift. She understood now. She had lived through the darkness, the heat, the fear, and the gnawing uncertainty. She had seen the desperation of neighbors and the life-saving impact of preparedness. The mockery was gone, replaced by a quiet respect and a newfound seriousness. The house was still damaged, the neighborhood still recovering, but something inside our home, between us, was slowly, painfully, starting to rebuild too. The foundation had cracked, but it hadn't shattered. Not completely. Months passed. The initial frenzy of the post-hurricane cleanup had given way to the slow, painstaking grind of rebuilding. The sounds of chainsaws and hammers replaced the wind's howl. Outhouse had needed a new roof, and a good deal of interior repairs due to leaks. Power was fully restored, roads cleared, and slowly, painstakingly, life began to resemble something normal. But the normal was irrevocably altered. The neighborhood too had changed. Some bonds had been forged in the shared suffering, like with Maria and Mrs. Rodriguez, who often stopped by to thank us. always bringing a small gift. Other relationships were strained. There were still whispers about the house with the generator, some admiring, some still holding resentment. Jim and Carol, with their baby, were eternally grateful, often bringing over homemade cookies or offering to help me with yard work. But others, the ones I had to turn away for non-essential charging or luxury requests, still gave me cold looks. It was a constant reminder of the hard choices I'd had to make, and the enduring scars of scarcity. Within our own home, the shift in Sarah was real, palpable. She no longer scoffed at my emergency food storage. Instead, she helped me rotate. She'd even started researching water purification methods online. When I bought more fuel cans, she didn't roll her eyes. She helped me clear a space in the shed for them. It wasn't just passive acceptance, it was active participation. One afternoon, I was cleaning out the garage, which had become a temporary storage for tools and debris. Sarah came in carrying a box of old board games. She stopped, looking at the spot where the generator had sat, a quiet, vacant space now. "You know," she said softly, "I had a dream the other night about the power going out again, but this time I wasn't scared. I just thought, okay, Mark's got this, we'll be fine." She looked at me, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "It's funny, isn't it? How it took something so terrible for me to finally see what you were trying to do." I put down the wrench I was holding. "It wasn't funny, Sarah. It was awful." Her smile faded. "I know, and I am still so sorry for the things I said. For making you feel small or crazy. I really was such an idiot." The apology this time felt deeper, more reflective. It wasn't just about the immediate crisis. It was about the years of dismissal. I wanted to say, "It's okay, I forgive you," but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, it wasn't entirely okay. The scar was there. Her mockery had cut deep, and while her change of heart was welcome, the memory of her disdain, especially during the hurricane, still stung. I was glad she understood now, but the pain of having been so alone in my efforts, so ridiculed by the person who was supposed to be my partner, wasn't something that simply vanished with an apology. "I appreciate you saying that, Sarah," I said, my voice neutral. "It means a lot." She nodded, sensing the unspoken reservation. "I know it's not just fixed. I know I hurt you a lot, and I'll have to live with that." She paused, then added, "But I promise you, Mark, it will never happen again. I'll never dismiss your concerns again. I'll be with you on this always." It was a solemn vow, and I believed her. She wasn't just talking about prepping anymore. She was talking about trust, about partnership, about respect. The hurricane had broken something between us. Yes. But it had also, ironically, laid bare the need for something stronger. For a while, I had felt a grim satisfaction in being right, but it was hollow. The real satisfaction came from her understanding, her partnership. But the cost of that understanding, the emotional toll it had taken, was immense. We were rebuilding our lives, our home and our relationship. But like a newly patched roof, there would always be a lingering shadow, a faint memory of the fury that had torn through our lives, and the painful lessons it had left behind. We had survived, but we weren't unchanged. We carried the scars of Evangeline, both on our property and in our hearts. A year had passed since Hurricane Evangeline. Trees were slowly regrowing their leaves, houses had new roofs, and the sounds of construction had faded into the background hum of everyday life. Our lives on the surface had returned to normal, but nothing was truly the same. The memory of those dark, uncertain days was etched deep within us, a permanent shadow. Summer was upon us again, and with it, the familiar cycle of hurricane warning. This time, when the first distant tropical depression formed in the Atlantic, there was no eye rolling from Sarah, no dismissive shrugs. Instead, she was the one checking the long-range forecasts, making sure our fuel cans were topped off, and organizing the pantry. "Mark, did you check the batteries in the weather radio?" she asked one evening, as a new storm started swirling far out at sea. Her tone was not one of worry, but of proactive readiness. "And I think we should get a few more cases of bottled water, just to be safe." I looked at her across the kitchen table, a small smile playing on my lips. "Already done, honey. And I restocked the first aid kits last month." She nodded, satisfied. There was a quiet competence about her now, a calm resolve that had replaced her old complacency. It wasn't a fun topic, prepping, but it was a necessary one, and she embraced it fully. The smug satisfaction I might once have felt, the desire to say "I told you so," was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet gratitude, a deep appreciation for her transformation. Being right didn't feel good when it came at such a high cost. But beneath the surface of this new shared preparedness, the scars remain. The moments of her mocking, the feeling of being alone and ridiculed, the crushing weight of her apology in the face of desperate need. Those memories were still there, like phantom pains. We never talked about it directly anymore, not the raw emotional core of our fight during the hurricane. It was a silent agreement. We had moved past it, yes, but we hadn't erased it. Sometimes, when I heard the low, distant hum of a large utility truck, a shiver would run down my spine. It was the sound of power, of relief, but it also reminded me of the terrifying silence when my own generator had finally died. I thought of Mrs. Rodriguez, thankfully still with us, and the agonizing choice I'd had to make. I thought of the neighbors I couldn't help, and the cold looks they still sometimes gave me. One afternoon, a new hurricane warning flashed across the television screen. This one was just a Category 1, but it was heading our way. Sarah walked over to me, her hand finding mine. Her grip was firm, reassuring. "We'll be ready, won't we?" she asked, her eyes meeting mine. There was no fear in her voice, only a quiet strength. "Yes, Sarah," I said, squeezing her hand. "We'll be ready." The words were about the storm, but they were also about us. We had learned, we had suffered, we had changed. The hurricane had stripped away the illusions, the comfortable denial, and the surface-level disagreements. It had laid bare the raw, fragile core of our relationship. It had been heartbreaking in the truest sense of the word, shattering the warmth and trust we thought we had. But from the ruins, something new, perhaps stronger, had begun to grow. It wasn't a perfect ending, not a fairy tale where all hurts vanish. It was real. It was scarred, but it was ours, and we would face whatever came next together. Quiet hum of the world outside, the distant rumble of potential storms, no longer filled me with dread, but with a sober understanding. We were prepared, not just for the weather, but for the hard truths of life and of each other.